came together as a result of a program that some of the writers here and I did at the Schomburg last year. And it was an amazing program. And I just said we had to replicate and add to the program overall. So we're so lucky that we're able to add another writer, Nicole Dennis-Benn, and to add one of the premier scholars in Caribbean literature, Professor Simone James Alexander, to the panel. Before I introduce Professor Alexander, and she will introduce the panel and take the proceedings on from here, I just want to take a moment to promote the Black Studies program. We have a couple more events for this month, not just this month, I should say, not this month at all, but for the rest of the semester. And we would love you all to come and be a part of it. First will be, the next program will be the New York African Studies Association Conference, and our theme is Music and the Arts in Africa and the Diaspora. It's on April 1st and 2nd, and it'll be here at City College, Aaron Davis Hall, and also that'll be a Friday, and a Saturday it'll be at Columbia. We're going to have amazing, amazing performances and guest speakers. People like Randy Weston will be coming out to give us, talks about their music, performances by Banning Eyre. You know what? I needed to give you the list of people which I don't have in front of me. But take a look at our website, Black Studies, ccny.cuny.edu/Black Studies, and you'll get a list of all the amazing people that will come out for this conference. And then, of course, I have to introduce, and maybe you've seen the flyer in the front, but you haven't, please take it before you go, our last speaker for this year, which will be Kwame Dawes. And, anyone who knows Caribbean literature, African literature, knows that Kwame Dawes is one of the premier poets that crosses both streams. So we're really looking forward to those programs. So now, to introduce Simone. And Simone, thank you so much for moderating, and thank you ladies for coming. You don't know how much I appreciate it. And as you can see from Tiffany, she made an extra effort. Okay. So Simone James Alexander is a professor of English and Africana Studies and the director of Africana Studies at Seton Hall University, New Jersey, where she teaches and researches in the areas of post-colonial literature, African American literature, African literature, Caribbean literature, Russian literature, I'm just discovering that now, American literature, and women writers. Professor Alexander's most recent book, African Diasporic Women Narratives, Politics of Resistance, Survival, and Citizenship, from the University of Florida Press, won the 2015 College Language Association Creative Scholarship Award. She's also the author of Mother Imagery in the Novels of Afro-Caribbean Women from the University of Missouri Press. Professor Alexander is currently working on Black Freedom in Communist Russia, Great Expectations, Utopian Visions, and Bodies of Indifference, Gender, Sexuality, and Nationhood. So welcome you all, and this is certainly going to be an amazing evening.
Okay, I'll stand and introduce you, but then during the Q&A, so. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. I'd like to say special thanks to Cheryl, as well as Jody and Kevin, for inviting me to be here with this phenomenal group of women. What I'll do, I'll first introduce everyone, and they'll speak for about 15 to 20 minutes, and I'll ask them a few questions, and then I'll open it up to the audience. I'd also like to very quick, because I teach in New Jersey, as Cheryl said, and right now I should have been teaching my women writers class, but what I did, I pulled my students out to be here with me. So I want to acknowledge, Jordan, Jackie, Krista, and Shannon, who's at the back, so we came from New Jersey. Okay, I'll also be introducing the speakers, the way they'll actually be speaking. Our first speaker for today, Nicole Dennis-Bennett, born and raised in Kingston, Jamaica. Nicole Dennis-Bennet's debut novel, Here Comes the Sun, will be published by W.W. Norton in July 2016. Her writing has been awarded a Richard and Julie Lutson Fiction Prize, and 2 of her stories have been nominated for the prestigious Pushcart Prize in Fiction. She has received fellowships from Hedgebrook, McDowell, Lambda Sewanee Writers Conference, Barbara Deming Memorial Fund for Women, among others. Her work has appeared in journals such as Electric Literature, Red Rock Review, Coeli Literary Journal, Mosaic, among others. She's a graduate of Cornell University and has an MPH from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and a MFA from Sarah Lawrence College. Our second speaker, Tiffany Unique. Tiffany is the author of the novel Land of Love and Drowning, which won the 2014 Flaherty Dunham First Novel Awards for the Center for Fiction and the Academy of Arts and Letters, the Rosenthal Family Foundation Award, and was listed by NPR as one of the best books of 2014. Land of Love and Drowning was also a finalist for the Orion Award in Environmental Literature and is currently a finalist for both the Hurston Wright Legacy Award and the Phyllis Wheatley Award. She has won several awards, including Caribbean Fiction, Boston Review Prize in Fiction, a Pushcart Prize, a Fulbright Scholarship, and an Academy of American Poets Prize. She has been listed by the Boston Globe as one of the 16 cultural figures to watch out for, and her writing has been published in the New York Times, Best African American Fiction, The Wall Street Journal, and American Short Fiction. Tiffany is from the Virgin Islands and is a professor in the MFA program at New School in New York. Her forthcoming collection, titled Wife, will be published in October 2015. And our third,
It's here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was published, so this should be updated. Okay, our final and last speaker, Ifiona Fulani, teaches in the Global Liberal Studies program at NYU. Her research interests include Caribbean, African, and Black British literatures and cultures, and her recent publication include a volume of essays, Archipelagos of Sound, Transnational Caribbeanities, Women, and Music. Her scholarly articles have been published in journals such as Small Axe, Anthurium, and Frontiers, a journal of women's studies. She is also a creative writer and author of a collection of short stories titled 10 Days in Jamaica, and a novel, Seasons of Dust, as well as stories published in the Beacon's Best Anthology series, in Small Axe, and in Black Renaissance. She holds an MFA in creative writing and a PhD in comparative literature, both from NYU. Thank you.
All right, good evening. So my name is Nicole Dennis Ben, and I'm actually reading from my debut novel, Here Comes the Sun, which will be out this July 19, 2016. All right. So just a brief overview of what this novel is about. It's actually set in Jamaica, and as you know, Jamaica, very high tourism, has a very, the tourism industry is something that the country looks to as revenue, and so this story is set in that moment where this one community, Riverbank, is about to be taken over by a resort that's building into their community. So it follows the lives of 3 women and what they actually have to do to survive. So I'm reading from one point of view, which is Tandy, which is the youngest daughter, who is under pressure to become a doctor by her mother and her sister, who's actually doing a lot to encourage her. But Tandy, given the class system in the country and the strong, the rigid structures to move your way up, looks, as in the scene, you'll see what she's more preoccupied with and the reasons why. Okay, first scene. Tandy sits naked inside Miss Ruby's old shack on a bench. The shack is made of zinc and wooden planks. The exposed nails rusted from the open air that enters from the sea. A leaning mango tree rests on the roof from Hurricane Gilbert, giving shade from the sunlight and protection from potential voyeurs. Black mangoes dangle inside, some of them rotting with dried seeds. Every so often, the sea breeze whispers something against the zinc roof or the gaping windows, leaving behind a salty breath that Tandy can taste on her lips. It's mid-February, but the humidity and drought they have been experiencing make it feel like the dry, hot months of summer. Tandy's back is hunched and her shoulders rounded. Tiny ants crawl on the dusty ground, a few making their way up the bench. She crosses and uncrosses her legs, fearing they might crawl into the mouth of her vagina. Across from her, Miss Ruby combines creams together, squeezing them inside a big white jar that used to contain hair straightening cream. The woman expertly mixes the concoction with the tail of a metal comb, her tongue stuck between her big pink lips as she furrows her eyebrows in deep concentration. She never breaks a sweat in the overbearing heat, though she wears a hooded sweatshirt that covers her forehead and arms to prevent burning from the sun. A pair of loose-fitting pants covers her legs. "You have the Queen of Pearl?" Miss Ruby asks. Tandy nods and hands it to her. "I don't want it now. You should use it daily. Not that it's any stronger than my concoction. But if you use them together, you're going to frighten to see how it work miracle. You must be careful same way." Miss Ruby says to Tandy, "How is school?" "Fine," Tandy says in a voice as small as the ants crawling on the floor. She puts the Queen of Pearl back inside her school bag. "You ready for the CXC?" Tandy shrugs. "I guess so." Tandy's entire high school career has been spent preparing for this one exam from the Caribbean Examination Council for 9 subjects. All except one was chosen for her. "You guess?" Miss Ruby puts her hands on her hips. "You better be. It's in 4 months, no?" "That's a big, big deal. My cousin in Kingston failed 5 subjects last year and they'd have to take them over. Another girl ended up dropping out and going to vocational school to learn a trade. Use your mother's only hope. You know how hard she worked for sending you to that school?" It's true. Dolores cheats tourists out of their money with cheap souvenirs she sells for triple the price in Falmouth Market. And Margot works long hours at the hotel. They do it for her. Tandy swallows, looking at her uniform piled on the floor like a rumpled sheet. It used to give her a sense of pride, but at this very moment, as she stares at it, she considers the other uses one could make of a white material that costs more than groceries for a month. Because of the expense, Tandy only owns 2 sets of uniforms, washing them by hand every evening after school, then ironing them for the next day. She looks down at her brown thighs. They haven't changed a bit since her last visit. "Do you think I can get light in 4 months?" she asks Miss Ruby, thinking of the party and the boys who will be there. "You took the plastic off," Miss Ruby says, a tinge of accusation in her voice. It was too hot," Tandy tells her. "I felt like I was going to pass out." "I used to be black like you, but look at me." Miss Ruby turns her head from side to side for Tandy to see her salmon-colored skin, delicate with the texture of scalded milk. "See how bright my skin come? If you follow instructions, yours will get this way quicker. Now that you have the Queen of Pearl, you might get lucky. If you want faster results, use it twice a day." She rubs the concoction up and down Tandy's neck, back, arms, and shoulders. She rubs everywhere but her butt crack. Miss Ruby is hardly tender. Tandy wonders if Miss Ruby's roughness is punishment for not having followed her earlier instructions. She imagines her blackness peeling off, the hydrogen peroxide Miss Ruby pours into the mixture acting like an abrasive, a medicine for her melancholy. She closes her eyes as the warm formula touches her skin. Miss Ruby works her way to Tandy's chest. The circular motion of a stranger's hands on her breast makes Tandy blush. She has never been touched this way. She opens her eyes and searches for something, anything that can take her mind off the sensation of this strange woman's fingers. She imagines herself a fish Miss Ruby rubs down with salt and vinegar before frying. Her eyes find the ceiling. Had she been able to lift her arm, she would trace the things she sees projected from her mind. "Luckily, you have good hair already," Miss Ruby says. "Good coolie hair. Your daddy's an Indian?" "I don't know," Tandy says, still staring at the planks in the ceiling. "Never met him." "Well, God played a cruel joke on you, because, child, if your skin was as pretty as your hair, you'd be one gorgeous woman." Miss Ruby isn't saying anything Tandy hasn't heard before. Her mother says the same thing, often shaking her head the way she does over burned food that has gone to waste. It's a pity you never have skin like your daddy. Tandy is neither the nutmeg brown that makes her sister Margot an honorable mistress, a rung lower than the bright-skinned wife, nor is she black like Dolores, whose skin makes people sympathetic when they see her. Who want to be black like that in this place? Miss Ruby once said to Tandy about her mother. Miss Ruby gives Tandy the homemade mixture in the jar for her to apply as needed. Only as needed, she stresses. These are very strong chemicals that could kill you. She then reaches for the saran wrap and begins to wrap Tandy's arms and torso. A mummified Tandy sits and listens to Miss Ruby's instructions. If you want to come quicker, leave on the plastic. Don't wash, don't go in the sun. If you have to go in the sun for whatever reason, make sure say you cover up at all times from head to toe. If you start to feel like you're going to faint, just drink water. It makes you sweat more. Whatever you do, now take off the plastic and remember, stay out of that sun. Miss Ruby repeats these words like an ominous warning, her eyes pouring into Tandy's. Tandy listens and nods, though she wants to rip the saran wrap off and jump into the river. She imagines her skin boiling, becoming molten liquid underneath the plastic wrap. Do I have to wear this all the time? Tandy asks. Heat and sweat is your advantage. Just bear it, Miss Ruby says, stamping her with a look. Tandy regrets saying anything, sensing her complaint might be interpreted as her wanting less out of life. Less opportunity, less chance of attracting the type of boys her mother and sister want her to attract, the type who will be at the party for sure. Less chance of acceptance in school, less chance to flunk school, the only ship on which black girls like her could float, given their looks will never do it for them. Her mother tells her this too. The only thing you have going for you is your education, no ruin it. Meanwhile, the unintelligent brownings in school end up with modeling contracts or with boyfriends with money they can spend on them. The less attractive ones get good jobs in their family businesses. What else does she have to fall back on if she fails the exam besides her drawings? But no one wants those. No one respects an artist. So when Tandy puts her clothes on, she pretends to ignore the crinkling of the plastic under her uniform and the nausea that comes over her. Miss Ruby examines her skin, her eyes like a sharp razor raking over Tandy's body, as though looking for areas she might have missed. Dark patches that need to be rubbed, scrubbed down with the rigor of someone scouring the bottom of a burnt pot. Or the way she used to scale fish. Her dark eyes having them a subtle hostility that reminds Tandy of the way the girls and nuns at school look at her. Can she tell Tandy doesn't belong? Can she sniff her deceit? Perhaps in that moment, Tandy reminds her of someone who did her wrong. Or of herself, the way she looked before she bleached her skin. How suddenly her mood changes once Tandy pays her that money. Remember to stay out of that sun like I tell you, Miss Ruby says, 'cause you and I both know God no like ugly. That's it. Thank you.
Good evening. So I bring my big pregnant self to the reading. Thank you to Jody Ann Francis for all her work in planning this, and to Cheryl Sterling, whose idea it was to begin with. Thank you, Simone, Professor Alexander, for the intros and for the conversation we're going to have. It's so exciting to be reading alongside a writer who has her first book coming out. Yeah. Nicole, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's an honor.
I was, what you read was just heartbreaking. Thank you for reading it. And thank you, I'm really looking forward to hearing what Ifiona reads. Ifiona is my label mate. We're both at People Tree Press these days. So I'm actually going to read from my poems. I just got good news about them that I will share with you, which is that the poems are now finalists for the Bocas Prize in Poetry, which is the Caribbean Regional Prize. So I'm really excited about that. I have done very little reading for the poems, and I haven't done any marketing or anything for them, so I was glad that somebody noticed them. This is actually just my second reading from the poems. I've only read from them once before, and they've been out since November, so I've been busy, gestating life and such. Please forgive me if you want to read, I'm going to run to the bathroom, and then I'll come back. I'm just announcing that so you don't think I'm being rude. Instead, I'm going to be crass and tell you that that's what I'm doing. Okay. I'm going to read just from around the collection. I mostly have been a fiction writer, but I'm a poet these days, and since the other two ladies on the panel were reading fiction, I thought I would read the poems. I'm going to start off by reading a poem that references my pregnancy, because, if you're going to be pregnant, you might as well talk about it in front of people. This poem is called The Baby Abandonment Station. When it was in Harlem off the one train, it was too easy to get to if you were a regular and knew of the Twin Express. Even the abandoners expected a little tribulation so they could feel the terrible karma of the journey. So now everyone must take their babies into Brooklyn. Again and again, babies get left on platform benches as though waiting for the downtown. No one remembering to whom the baby belongs. A mother watching from amongst the other humans, her fingers gripped to bone around the rail, but her head turned slightly away like a god. More often, the baby will stay on the train until it empties. So that was awful, right? To be pregnant and reading you a poem about abandoning babies, just to make everybody uncomfortable. Dangerous things. This is the island. It is small and vulnerable. It is a woman calling. You love her until you are part of her, and then just like that, you make her less than she was before. The space that you take up is a space where she cannot exist. It is something in her history that does this. Don't mind her name. The island is a woman. Therefore, dangerous things live below, beautiful things also, which can be most dangerous. True, we will never be beyond our histories, and so I am the island, and so this is a warning. The collection is called Wife, and it's mostly a poem about what it means to be a wife these days, especially in the very peculiar thing of a heterosexual relationship. What it means to be a feminist who finds yourself attached to a dude for the rest of your life, and how that's kind of like a strange thing to be doing, and sometimes a thing that compromises your feminism. So the poem is really about questioning and challenging some of those things. I am currently a wife, and I should say my husband is not in the room, but it is being recorded, so I will say that I'm happily married. But the poems do come up from a place of questioning and challenging. This poem is called Dictionary. We're wrong, Simone. Dictionary. Wife, European origins, a married woman, as in slave in the house, as in chef, maid, nanny, and prostitute, but unpaid for these services. A woman defined in relation to her spouse, generally a man. In the colloquial, wife means woman, as in old wives' tale, meaning a story passed down by ignorant old women. As in, she's my wife, not my mistress, and so did not receive a fur for Christmas. Instead, I bought her a vacuum cleaner, which she loved. Wifey, American Negro origins. Diminutive of wife, but more desirable. Girl who cooks, cleans, fucks, and gives back massages. As in, I took this girl home to my mom's and she brought potato salad instead of a bottle of wine because she's a good wifey and knows better. Woman to have sex with, but to whom you are not married and probably will never marry, or might marry if she gets pregnant and then she will become wife. If she is not wed at the time of giving birth, she will become a baby mama, a diminutive less desirable for all parties. Get wife, Caribbean origins. To have sex, to fuck a human female, to be on a mission to have sex, as in, you get wife last night? That must be why you were in such a good mood. Or, my woman vexed with me and ain't give me the wife in a week. A man might say to a whore, I'll give you $20 for the wife, meaning I will pay you an inadequate sum to fuck you. Get translates loosely to have. Wife is a direct translation of sex. To wife, origins unknown. A feminine specific verb suggesting a woman has convinced a man she is worthy of romantic and sexual commitment. As in, he promised to wife me, but I'm still waiting on the ring. Once the woman has the ring, being wifed may be elevated to being ringed, as in lassoed, as in good enough that a man would swing a rope around you. Preferably, the rope is made of gold and has a diamond at the knot. Thank you. You don't have to clap between the poems, but thank you. African animal. The tradition is that as the son grows older, he is driven out. He keeps to the corners of the community, but the women refuse him their shelter or care. He does not understand what mama understands, that he will turn bull, will attack the babies and justify it. He is just a child himself now. He trails the women longing for them until one morning they are simply not there, and he searches. Perhaps they are hiding, perhaps they are dead, but no, they are only just gone from him. This dismissal is the solution or it is the sickness. He eats alone. He builds himself a home. He waits for the women to come with great hope. He waits. When one arrives, he welcomes her with dance, a meal, but she wants a new home, one for lovemaking. He builds it for her. He uses his imagination. He spends his worth, he honors her, but she finds the place unsatisfactory. He builds another and another until she relents, accepts. When she is with child, he becomes nostalgic for his own childhood. He remembers his mother and his sisters. Of course, his bride does not stay. He yearns for a boy child who will want him, but he never knows. When his lover returns, he is too grateful to ask, too grateful to note that she has the mark of many births on her body, the mark of other bulls. He will never become accustomed to her leaving. He will challenge other cast out sons in hopes that she hears of his valor, loves him. In battle, there is a recognition among the bulls. Is this his son, now grown and come to challenge him? Is this his brother? This is Everybody Needs a White Husband. We all need a little bleach to shine. You can't walk up any colored carpet brown on brown. You know you'll disappear. Can't get a job? Well, you better shackle down a white husband. Hungry, thirsty? Oh, he can fix that too. He can remake God in your image if you ask with the correct inflections. And best of all, he can give you milky babies with hair you don't have to be ashamed of. Believe me, I understand. A husband is meant to be a trophy, but he can also be a white peace flag, a thing to surrender in the wind and signal that you can get along. But the trick is letting him go. When is the right time to break the news? When is the perfect moment to admit that the marriage is just about your momentum in the world? Girl, I can't help you there. Just make sure your kinky pubic hairs leave imprints on his face. Everyone knows that's a symbol better than a wedding ring. Somehow you know about them kinky pubic hairs on the face.
Powerful image.
You're showing yourself. I have two more poems. This is Last Yannick Nation. It's after a poem by Derek Walcott. The pit in my womb where the doctor lover says is myself is not a nation. My soul is called Che, as in Guevara, but my body has not died for the nation. I told my enemy I loved her as I love my nation. Guevara was no coward, which means he tended towards fool. I want to be a fool in love and thus a fool for this nation. My soul doesn't care about nations. My soul makes its country in the backyard or bedroom of wherever I carry it. My islands do not make a nation, yet my soul guards their bodies, their waters. That then is the nation. Yes, the pink pit does bear the possibility of nations. Che rests its teeth into my belly. I feel the love and remember Guevara, the man, had no nation but nations. He died for the end of our nation. I speak my soul only language, dare doctor, revolutionary in the name of no nation. Despite the proxy of vows, I am both body and nation. This is my last poem. It's called Traditional Virgin Islands Wedding Verse. It's a form that I created. In the Virgin Islands, we are not a nation, we're a colony of the United States. But we are still developing our sort of national or territorial literature. And I thought I would create a form that I would name after my islands. So a Virgin Islands verse has to have the word belonging or its synonym in it. That's really the only thing it has to have. And traditional Virgin Islands wedding verse. Thank you guys for listening. When you are born, you are passed to your father's arms or your mother's chest. Your parents claim you. You belong to them. Before you even know you are your own, you know that you are someone else's. You are bonded. You need to belong. Then you belong to the land, the town in which you are raised. You belong to the city you choose. These places have a hold on you. They claim you. I am from, you say. I am of. Perhaps you belong to the school, to the church. You say, I am, and name what you do for sustenance. These things own you, and you own them. You are part of a tribe. It is not a shackle. It is the true story of self-creation. It is what makes you. You come to belong to yourself. You say, I am, and call your own name. And now you belong to each other. You are of the same tribe. I am his wife, you will say, and I am her husband. You are future ancestors of the same village, and you have made this choice by your own choice. You will weld yourself with regard to each other and because of each other. You will weave your own self to the other. You are now native to each other. You say, I am yours. I claim you. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Very happy to be here. Thank you to Cheryl Sterling and to Jody Ann Francis for organizing this event. It's a pleasure to be reading again with Tiffany and also to be reading with someone I've not met before and not heard before. It's a pleasure. Thanks. Thank you, too, for introducing us so charmingly. I'm going to read from a collection of stories titled 10 Days in Jamaica. It's a collection of stories about Jamaican women at home in Jamaica and in the Jamaican diaspora in New York, in London, and even further afield. The story I'm reading from is titled A Striped Silk Shirt. It's a story in 3 parts. It's about a single parent, B, and her daughter, Daria. Daria is 13 years old and sexually curious. B is struggling to be a responsible mother, not to restrain her daughter too much, but to bring her up with Jamaican values. I'm reading from the last part of the story. B comes home from work. Weariness weighs on your shoulders as you turn the key in the door. You kick off your shoes as soon as you step inside, and your feet seem to heave their own sigh of relief. You call to your daughter, "Honey, I'm home." She calls out in reply, saying something you can't tell for the music playing loud in her room. She's cleared up the kitchen. You've trained her to do this. But more times than not, she forgets, so it comes as a pleasing surprise when she does it. She's taken a chicken from the freezer to defrost. She has cleaned and washed a measure of white rice and set it to soak in a pot like a trove of seed pearls in cloudy white water. If she hadn't done these things, you'd be banging on her door, complaining that you are not her cook and housekeeper. How many times, how many evenings have been ruined in this way? You don't need that particular stress this evening. You've eaten nothing all day but a bagel, and you sat for 2 hours in a meeting with the vice president, your belly growling while he chatted on and on about the fall donation collection program. All day long, you felt hot and sweaty in a too tight dress. Your skin relaxes when you peel off the royal blue frock. You wonder why you keep it. It's ill-fitting, and that particular shade of blue makes your complexion look ashy. You keep it because you have the habit of thrift, learned from your mother. She owns a restaurant and 2 brownstones, yet she cuts pantyhose in half to save the undamaged leg. Waste it, she'd say, and you soon won for it. You shower and rest for a few minutes. You lie down in your underwear, and then you remember Daria. You realize you haven't seen her since you came home. What's she doing in her room? Loud music, no hug, no hi, Mom. Oh. Or awo, as we'd say in Jamaica. You get up and pull on your robe. You pad down the hall. You knock on her door. Daria, if you turned down that noise, you'd hear me knocking. The volume decreases. You listen for her to call you to come in. The call doesn't come. You push open the door. You walk in. She's lying on the bed, her face turned to the wall. You could think she was sleeping, but her limbs are too neatly placed, legs together and fully stretched out, hands together and under her cheek, like she was praying and drifted asleep. You know she's only pretending. You think perhaps she's playing with you, that she will spring up, lioness style, when you get close. One of her favorite little games when she was small, that she still plays occasionally when she's in high spirits. You tiptoe to the bed. You pretend you don't realize she can hear you. You pounce, grab her shoulder, and roll her over. You see her face, and your mouth drops open. The purple eye, the swollen cheek, the swollen, broken lip. Oh my God, who did this? Your heart thuds, your fingers curl into claws. What happened to you, Daria? Who did this? You sit beside her and make your voice sound calm. She pulls the sheet over her head, but you pull it back. You place your hand on the undamaged cheek and turn her face towards you gently. I got into a fight, so low you can barely hear. With who? About what? It's not like you to fight. Where did it happen? On the way home from school, some girl picked on me for no reason. Picked on you for no reason? What kind of fucking animals do they have at that school? Don't swear, Mom. What's her name, this girl? She's bigger than you? She sits up, then gasps and clutches her side. You push away her hand, lift up her t-shirt to look. You see a bruise that arcs like a small banana to the side of her rib cage, a few inches below her left breast. We're going to the emergency room now. Oh, Mom, it'll be better tomorrow. She might have broken your rib. Look how you're wincing. You're in pain. Come on, miss, get on your clothes. And tomorrow morning, we're going up to that school, and I'm going to make sure that girl gets suspended. You don't call your mom till you get back from the hospital because you don't want her to worry. Your skinny little daughter, all beaten up like some street ruffian. Except a ruffian would have had some anger, some rage against her assailant, not this shrinking, almost guilty timidity. In your wild mind, you're storming into the principal's office, confronting her with your daughter's injuries. You're demanding punitive action against the girl, the animal. Another voice, your calm mind, is reasoning, what could you have done? It happened, not your fault. You can't prevent what you didn't foresee. You make her comfortable on the sofa, open windows, turn on a fan, the TV. You warm some milk, add vanilla and honey the way she likes it. You give it to her with a straw. You start to make dinner, but the defrosted chicken reminds you of a newborn, legs and arms all curled up. It looks vulnerable. Your eyes mist over. You remember that you didn't plan to have her. You didn't even want to have her at first. She came out of nothing more than a flicker of everyday desire, a moment of routine pleasure. You weren't even in love with Denny then. Didn't you take precautions, your sister asked, adding irresponsibility to her list of your failings. Are you sure you want to do this? Denny had asked, meaning, are you sure you won't have an abortion? I'm not ready for fatherhood yet. Are you sure you're ready for this? Your mother asked. You'd been afraid to tell her. You were afraid of her disappointment, afraid of what you might read in her eyes. She touched your cheek with a nervous hand. She's a capable woman, short but Taloa, tough and strong. Her hand does not shake easily. You know from the tremor of the veined, beringed fingers that she feared for you. Later, as your belly grew, you recalled the trembling hand, and you wondered then, as you do now, did she carry you fearfully in her womb? Mom, you got a moment? The restaurant full tonight, she says. Voices hum in the background, the bell-like chink of cutlery rattling. It's Daria. What happened? Nothing to panic about. A bully picked on her, a girl at school, bruised her ribs and cut her lip. Children not safe at school these days. She chirps deep and long. I'm going to see the principal about it tomorrow. I'll come with you. What time? 9. Okay, I'll come for you. It's a marvel how she came. She came out of nothing and she took over your life. Just when you got used to her turning and turning inside you, in a world you could only see on a sonogram, she forced her way out into your world. She tore your flesh. She stole what privacy you had. Your belly was marked by her. Your whole body changed. Your body was no longer your own. Your body belonged to her, her nourishment, her haven. You felt she was yours alone. Cradling her the first time, new and almost weightless in your arms, you trembled. You ached at the sight of delicate, dark eyelids, purple rosebud mouth. She squirmed in your arms, murmuring. You broke out in sweat, your knees trembled, remembering the beating in your womb, that second heart. You read somewhere that if an infant loses sight of its mother for more than 2 hours or so, the infant imagines the mother is dead and begins to mourn. The child feels all the pain and heartbreak of loss. Every morning when you left your daughter with her childminder, Mariana, you rained kisses on her head. You murmured assurances. At lunchtime, you would wonder what pictures were running through her mind. What was she feeling? If she were crying for you, grief-stricken. Her joy when you collected her at the end of the day, the frenzy of squeals as you walked through Mariana's front door. Were they expressions of relief at your miraculous return to life? You told yourself she was learning early about separation, that parting need not mean the end of a thing, that parting holds the promise of return. When you were 14, Daria's age, you lived with your Aunt Martha in Jamaica. You, your sister Plummy, your brother Baltimore. Your mother was in New York. Your father lived with his new woman in Kingston. Aunt Martha's house was small, wooden, damp in the rainy season. It perched like a birdhouse on a hillside. For years, you lived for your mother's fortnightly letters. You didn't see her from you were 9 till you were 16. Your father called today. Daria is staring out at the window at the sky. He left a message, says he's moving back to New York in August. Your daughter looks at you, disbelief in her eyes, mouth fixed by its dressing in a downturn like a sneer. Sure you didn't dream it? What do you mean? You dreamt Aunt Diva called, remember, long after she died? There she goes, Miss Smartass again. Yeah, well, this is a real message on my very real answering machine. I thought you'd be pleased. I'd be pleased when I see him. Daria turns and lies on the sofa, staring out of the window, seeing what out there? You search her profile, trying to guess her thoughts, but you have no clues, no guide. Smartass one moment, airhead the next. There was a time her habit of retreating into her own world alarmed you. You thought of attention deficit, autism. But she made reasonable progress at school, and you saw there was nothing wrong with her ability to think, to reason. Just this switching off, this drifting away. Even now, as you watch her, you feel she is not really in the room with you. Your mother always said she would grow out of it. She said you would expect what you would expect a mother to say. Daria need a baby brother or a sister and a father figure around the place. The problem, your mother said, is that she's spoiled and selfish. Words your mother speaks as though they describe sins or criminal tendencies, which they are in the world your mother comes from. You did not want to raise your child as you were raised. You wanted her to be free, to play, laugh, feel. You didn't want to make her your domestic helper, overburdened with chores and responsibilities. Back home, when you were still a child, you had to mind your sister, Plummy. You were only 3 years older, but she was your responsibility. When you were 10, you washed her clothes, you combed her hair, you made sure she was neat and clean on school days before you took care of yourself. Baltimore, the eldest, had different tasks being a boy. Fetching water from the tank, coal for the stove, clearing the yard, back and front, and helping Aunt Martha in her lean-to shop. Your mother sent for you all. She brought you to live with her in Brooklyn. The girls first, then, eventually, Baltimore. When you were in Jamaica, fretting over homework you had to do and the schoolwork you couldn't finish, you dreamed of America. You never dreamed life here would be hard. Different, strange, but not hard. Plummy always preferred Jamaica. She moved back there 5 years ago. She has a husband and a child of her own now. When she recalls the years with Aunt Martha, does she remember how you cared for her? She has a child of her own now, so she must know the burden of it, the weight of a young life on your hands.
Okay, thank you to all three of the great readers. I'll begin the question. Since this is a panel on women rights in the Caribbean, I think it's fitting that I begin with an obvious question. For all three writers, since you're all invested in memory and history, can you share with us what are some of your earliest memories of wanting to become a Caribbean woman writer? And also, okay, who has impacted you? Whose works have influenced you?
That's actually a really good question. First of all, I did not think or dream of becoming a writer while I was in Jamaica. First of all, I went to high school there, and our parents, there was immense pressure to be doctor, lawyer, engineer, business person, something practical, something that could actually make money, right? And so when I came here, I went to Cornell. I was pre-med, and thinking I'll come out as a doctor. Went to got my MPH at University of Michigan. Still, I was doing things because I thought that was what I should do, and I never thought of myself, I still wrote in private. However, there was something that happened between working at Columbia doing research, of course meeting my wife, who in the front here, who challenged me because she said to me one day, you're writing more than you're doing research. Are you a writer or are you a researcher? And I had to own that. Another thing too is that I grew up working class in Jamaica, and a lot of our writers are middle to upper middle class male, and maybe British, Canadian, who moved there, and they have the luxury. And I always saw creativity as luxury growing up there. So I was looking at these men as, I'll never get there. That would never be me, right? And so I never told myself that I could do this until coming here, getting into my MFA program at Sarah Lawrence, and writing from my heart as a working class woman, especially given that we've always been portrayed as caricatures in literature, because these are the men who look at us, or outsiders who look at us working class and say, well, they're the miserable ones, or they're the ones, who should scrutinize from afar. But our stories are important for us ourselves to be told. So I'm glad that I'm owning this now as a Caribbean writer. Now I'm actually curious to see how I'll be received back home, because one thing that I realized, I've never felt embraced by Caribbean writers. I've never felt I I've always been supported mostly by African American writers and white authors, and so it's interesting now when it's shifting, being in this room, being invited by Cheryl, and I was just like taken aback because I was like, oh my God, I'm on this panel with other Caribbean women, and I was really nervous about how I'd be perceived because I know deep down that I still probably carry that 10-year-old girl with me that, oh, you don't belong here. Like, no, you're in primary school. Like, what are you doing in the uptown world of this, right? And so I have to tell myself literally that, no, I deserve this because our voices need to be here as well. So that was my journey thus far. But.
When I was growing up, I never thought of becoming a writer. I read a lot. I read nonstop. I was always buried in a book. But I grew up in England. I didn't see any black writers around me. Maybe I saw one or two, Ben O'Cree, I remember, but there were men. I didn't read a book by a black woman until I was in my early 20s, Paul Marshall, Brown Girl, Brown Stone. I will never forget that experience. But still, I didn't see myself becoming a writer, although I was very passionate about literature. But I had a story that I wanted to explore. I didn't know how I would explore it. I didn't know whether I would take a sociological approach or what. I wanted to write about Jamaican family experience in the diaspora, in London. And that eventually became my first novel. That story was the core of my first novel. And actually, I had to leave England and return to Jamaica to write that novel. Something about that context did not empower me, did not make me feel that, this was something I could do here successfully. I wrote the novel, and I attended a summer workshop in Miami, the Caribbean Writers Workshop. And it was a revelation. There were people writing similar stories to me, with similar backgrounds from across the Caribbean, from all the islands. And that was the first time I saw myself as part of a movement, part of a community, part of a collective. And that's when I began to think of myself as a Caribbean writer, right? I subsequently moved from Jamaica to New York to study at NYU. And there is a community of Caribbean writers here. There's a community of black women writers here. I feel I'm part of overlapping communities of writers, and I'm really happy about that, yeah.
So I grew up in the Virgin Islands, St. Thomas, specifically. My grandmother who raised me was a librarian. So there were lots of books in my house, and we could read anything. As long as you could read it, So I read all kind of nonsense that I probably was too young to be reading. But because we're in the Virgin Islands, we are effectively a colony of the US. The British Virgin Islands is a colony of Britain. And we're the same people, but both colonized, so living very similar, under similar circumstances. It meant that I had read a lot of American writers, and I hadn't read a lot of Caribbean writers. I was very well read because of my grandmother, but I didn't really know Caribbean writers. There was a Walcott book somewhere in our library at home, but that was really it. So for a long time, I was so ignorant, but also like self-important, that I thought I was going to be the first Caribbean woman writer ever. I know, right? What kind of ridiculousness? And I remember when I was around 14, discovering in the room that I lived in that there were some poems in boxes that I hadn't written. Now, by this time I was 14, I already thought of myself as a writer, as a poet specifically, that I was going to be the first Caribbean woman writer. After Walcott was the first writer, and I was going to be the second one in my mind. I know, I was so stupid. And I discovered these poems that I hadn't written, and I was looking through them, and I was like, how interesting. And I discovered these letters that I hadn't written about poetry. And there was a picture of me, but I didn't remember ever wearing that dress in that picture. And I realized that it was my mother. And although my mother didn't raise me, my father didn't raise me either, I realized for the first time that I was living in my mother's old room and that she had wanted to be a poet too. So that for me reified my desire to be a poet, and that I would do it for not only for myself, but I would do it for her also. Now, I didn't realize that there was actually an entire canon of Caribbean literature, and even really specifically Caribbean women literature, until I got to undergrad, which I did in Boston. And I took a class where we read 3 Caribbean literature books, and they were all 3 by women. And I'll name them because they were so important to me. One was Brown Girl in the Ring by Nalo Hopkinson. That's a badass book if you haven't read it yet. The other was Edwige's first book, which, not Crick Crack, her first novel, Breath Eyes Memory, which was so inspiring, and which actually my teacher in high school had said I remembered later that my teacher in high school had said she was going to teach to us, but our school, the principal, who was an old school British colonial type woman, had disallowed it. So we had never read it in high school. So I read it in college. And the third was the Paul Marshall, which I think has been for a lot of women writers, like one of the first Caribbean books that we read, Brown Girl, Brown Stone. I remember going to my teacher freshman year and saying, "Where did you find these people?" As if she had pulled them from some old archive. These people were all alive and writing actively. But I was so ignorant to the community. But once I realized that there was a community, I was pretty fervent that I wanted to be part of that community. So when I did my Fulbright, which I did right after graduating from undergrad, I did it to study Caribbean women's literature across the board. So I went to Jamaica and I interviewed writers like Erna Broadbur, like hardcore feminist, badass women who like lived in a bush and writing poems. And I went to Trinidad and did the same thing, Merle Collins. I spent a lot of time just talking to these women because I knew I wanted to be part of that community. And I knew that it was going to be especially hard for someone from a US colony to do that. And so I did it consciously and actively. And I feel now that I am part of that community, and I'm enriched by it, and it really is my primary community.
I find it very interesting that Tiffany Oki and Ifiona Oki references Paul Marshall, and Paul Marshall has Oki in her collection, The Mother Poets, right? And I was just wondering if you kind of like contemplating or writing for your mother had anything to do with Paul Marshall's imagery of the mother poets, who are, domestic women who are not necessarily career writers, but they do concoct, whatever in the kitchen.
The kitchen poets. I love that essay that she writes about the women poets who are chatting in the kitchen and you overhearing them and you're inheriting their vernacular. For me, that wasn't so much how I went down because my mother wasn't around. For me, I had my librarian grandmother was probably the closest I came. Her job, she was the only children's librarian on Island. By the time I came around, she was already retired. But her role had been to tell stories, and that's what children's librarians do. They read the story or they make up stories. And so whenever the power would go out, which happened all the time and still does in St. Thomas, Granny would tell us Anansi stories. And I think that is actually where my storytelling impulse comes from, is from hearing her actually talk story, the Anansi and the chicken and the cockroach and all this cool stuff, some of it that she was making up, but some of it that she had also inherited. So it wasn't that I was overhearing gossip so much or like chatting and mele. It was more that I was having stories actually framed and delivered to me by my grandmother, and then eventually the poems by my mother.
Okay. Ifiona, I was very struck that you said that Jamaica functioned as a space of creativity for you, and I was just curious because there are lots of writers before who have said that, especially like Maurice Conde, and who said they could not have written or done any work in the Caribbean. So I think you have that whole reverse. But can you speak to Jamaica's this creative space?
I was born in Jamaica and left when I was 3.5, so I didn't grow up there. I grew up in England. And I had a fairly decent life, endured the usual experiences of a black child growing up in Britain, right? I endured racism, I endured a kind of indifference on the part of the community. But racism in Britain is very polite. It's not as it is here. I didn't grow up feeling oppressed, but I didn't grow up feeling confident. And confidence was something that hit me in the face when I arrived in Jamaica, not my own confidence, other people's. I saw people just living and expressing themselves so freely. And Jamaica is a place that, a place of tensions that fosters creativity across the island, across classes, across experiences. And I think I just plugged into the creative energy of Jamaican people, which I had connected with through music before returning, but on my actual return, I was never as happy as I'd been. My story is the reverse of many stories. I was never as happy as I'd been in Jamaica, anywhere else as I was in the 7 years I lived in Jamaica. Every morning, I woke up happy. Every day, I felt fulfilled. Yeah. So that's what Jamaica means for me.
Can I speak to that? So I couldn't have created unless if I had moved to the States. So I mentioned earlier that I grew up working class. So coming here to America has given me a privilege to actually return home and write. So Here Comes the Sun was actually created going back there to the villas, being catered to. And one of the things that I write against, because I remember one time I listened to a panel with Tiffany Unique, and the question that you asked was, what do you write against? And, I write against this concept of Jamaica being happy or paradise. It's not paradise. It's privileged individuals from outside looking in that see us as smiling people, confident people. I was that girl, Tandy, who actually thought I was not light enough to surpass my social class. I couldn't have gone to Cornell University if I hadn't come here and gone to Nassau Community College with my dad, who had to come here and drive his taxis so that I can go to Cornell, go to MFA, and get into my MFA program and be the professor I am right now and the writer. So the Jamaican that I am now, I'm being welcomed back uptown because I've made it here in America as a writer. When this book drops, Calabash, I will be reading at Calabash, but would I have been invited to Calabash if I if I went to UWI, came out as a secretary? No. So it depends on what class you're looking at, and waking up in Strawberry Hill smiling at the universe, that's great when you have achieved something abroad and come back. But when you're there, you're not the confident person. You may put it on because they're told you have to sell the country to these tourists so that they can come back, but they're not smiling, they're actually gritting their teeth.
Interesting.
Yeah. My experience is somewhat maybe in the middle. I also grew up, I would say, just poor. We used to eat like butter and sugar sandwiches. And I grew up in a really rough neighborhood where people got shot and gunned down on a regular, but the tourists don't go. The tourists are not allowed to come. So I feel some of what you're feeling, Nicole, too. But I like Ifiona, I really write best at home, and I think that's because my grandmother is there, and because her presence was the presence that allowed me to have the confidence to get my backside into a good school and MFA, blah, 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 blah. So for me, my grandma actually has passed away, but she's still there, So I feel like being there on the island, being home, hearing the voices of the Virgin Islanders, all of that is a really important part of my process. Virgin Islanders, we have a different dialect than, say, Jamaicans or Trinis. And even when I was publishing my first novel, the copywriter was constantly Jamaicanizing the voice in my book because they're familiar with Jamaican patois. And And it was only because I really had written most of that book in St. Thomas that I felt very strongly and fervently about the way that I was using the vernacular and could push against her. For me, it's really important to physically be there. Besides the fact that even if we're not sunny and happy, and I think a lot of it is performative for tourism, sunshine for me is good. Just having some sunshine makes it easier to work and write. My favorite place to write is actually laying on the beach. So now that I'm a professor too, I feel lucky actually to be able to say, I have to go do my research, give me some research funds, go lay on a beach.
Yes. Let me clarify. So we do go back to write. Like, I do go back home to write because I love hearing the people. And if I can't go back home, I go on Flatbush Avenue and just sit down at a cafe or somewhere and just like listen.
The capital of the Caribbean.
Right, exactly. So yeah, that's a big plus that comes, with being here and being able to go back on vacation or research and just to be immersed in that. Yeah.
Okay, Nicole, two quick questions. The title of your book, can you, speak to it? I know it's the title of a Beatles song, right? Here Comes the Sun. Yeah, and I would love you to. And also, the second question, if I may, very quickly, it's in terms of working class, right? Because the woman you also represented in the text, you said that girl is you, right? It's working class who's trying to attain upward social mobility.
Right.
But I think it's very problematic that there's skin bleaching. Can you speak?
Right.
Can you problematize?
Yeah. So first of all, Here Comes the Sun. I did not know about the Beatles song when I came up with the title. In fact, I had not heard of a song, not even the Nina Simone version. Here Comes the Sun came when I was like, well, it's so ironic that here's a beautiful natural element in the sky, but we were raised to fear it. Like speaking to skin bleaching, speaking about dark skin, working, like trying to move our way up. We ran to the shelter, right? We definitely did not want anything to do with this beautiful sunshine. So the fact that here the sun in this novel represents this ominous symbol, it definitely can reveal certain things, certain secrets. Dolores, one of the characters, she's cast in shadow. Usually Margot, she definitely represents, and Jamaica is really being exploited for the beauty, but also tap into the exploitation of women's bodies in this book. And so, a lot of the times you hear about homophobia there, but really a lot of our girls are walking around voiceless. Incest is so high there, rape, and so we don't hear our black girls' voices. Yes, we hear from our male counterparts, but we don't hear from our women. And so I was like, if I get the opportunity now that I have this platform to be published, I want to put it out there. And so the sun is now representative of like all the dark things coming to light. So that's what my book represents, and this title represents. In terms of bleaching, I did do more research there. In addition to personal experiences, not going to the extent that Tandy went to, but also one of my good acquaintances, Diane Jackson Miller, who is a journalist, and she's a journalist now, and she tapped into a great documentary on bleaching, and it really touched me to the point where I went back home, I interviewed her. I also spoke to individuals who actually take it to the extent that it's at right now, where people are actually, the saran wrap that I read, that's actually just going on, and then to cover the saran wrap, they actually wear long sleeve shirts. Because of the sun on the island, you have to really cover all parts of your body, wear hats, wear thick socks so that your skin is not exposed to that element. Until nighttime, if you're bleached beautifully, I'm gonna put that in quotation, that's when you strip off the sweaters and the plastic and they call you're now clear, you're pretty clear. So you could go to your dances, you could go to your parties as browning. And so that's what they're trying. And also, unfortunately, they think they're going to move up class-wise that way as well. Really, it's education and, opportunities, but most of the individuals who are bleaching, they don't have that opportunity, so they look for the next best thing, which is lightening them skin, thinking that they're going to be accepted into that world. And so that's what really the heart of where that came from.
Okay, Tiffany, I actually had questions about your actual, your fiction, but I just wanted to, perhaps, linger a little bit on the poem that you actually read, Wife, right? If you may, okay, I felt as though, okay, the terminology was constructed within the framework of Victorian notions of decency and propriety. And I think, okay, as it moved from perhaps, okay, geographically, it seems to disintegrate, or perhaps not disintegrate, it's reappropriated. Can you address, and I'm wondering, okay, can this reappropriation be read perhaps as a form of resistance in itself? Where it's wife and then it's wifey and then to be wife, depending on where and who uses or deconstructs or reconstructs or reconfigures the terminology.
Well, Professor Alexander, you are the scholar, and I hope you will write a paper where you discuss the deconstruction and mention Foucault and such. But actually, I don't actually think it gets deconstructed, and this is just my thinking as the poet, and I do really honestly believe that readers and scholars do half of the work of the poem, right? Once you're the reader, you are 50% of the piece. The writer is only the first 50. So my opinion actually is that it's kind of the same thing, that ultimately I'm saying that we can think about that this is that women's bodies and the role of the wife is maybe more liberated or more uplifted in different cultural contexts, but actually it's always reduced to sex in all the contexts. Sometimes in ways that we can recognize as systematically oppressive, and sometimes in ways that we might think are funny and humorous, and that even wives themselves might joke about, but it's still ultimately the same thing. So that's what, in my reading of it, is that was the work that I was doing in that poem.
Okay, I have a question for Fiona, but I'm just going to open it to the audience so I can get you involved in the discussion as well, and then perhaps I'll come back, I'll piggyback and ask questions here. So does anyone have any questions for the authors?
Come to man.
Does this now definition that the second writer, the poet, offers in terms of marriage being reduced, or women's roles in marriage being reduced to what is now considered a wife or wifey, how does that translate to your relationship? And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but oh my goodness, to sort of talk about a newly constructed, perhaps a newly constructed paradigm of marriage and how it will be defining what it means to be a wife or a wife
Do it.
or something else.
She's like, oh my
Do it, sister. Do it.
Oh gosh.
Come on now. Platform.
You know what? So
No man.
yeah, the thing is that, so of course, Emma's sitting there. So I definitely, it took a while for me to even wrap my mind around being wifed. Like, I still walked around like, because one thing is that our relationship, we have been together for 8 years, and I proposed to her. I definitely wanted her to be my wife, and I don't know, nobody really told me that, but then in terms of walking around, like I got her name, all these things, and I just felt, even though society, we're always immersed in my culture and also her culture, but her culture actually accepts us as wives, like as two women who are married. Well, somewhat. But my family, on the other hand, the concept of wife to them when they see us walk in the room, it's still hard for them to process. So together we are working on that, which is why, of course, I love this poem. But we're working on that. How to preserve our relationship or marriage in our, because people looking on, even walking on Fulton Street in Brooklyn, hand in hand, we still get stares as two women walking on the street. So, it's important for us to still walk hand in hand, given that we're married, and this is something that we're not going to hide from the world. So the concept of wife for us means that we're going to actually bear that. We're going to stare it in the face and keep walking together. So I don't know if that answers it.
Any other questions?
Hi. So I just had a question for all of you about your experiences publishing your books. I imagine as a Black Caribbean writer, it's a little different, I might be assuming, than, like, say, a white male author who is based in the U.S. So I just wondered, did you notice any significant challenges, and is there a community of sort of, you mentioned there's a community of Caribbean writers, is that helpful? Just curious.
So after my MFA program, I did get an agent, but because that person read the patois, felt like somebody in Michigan would not understand it. So of course we parted ways, and then it took me, a little while to get a new agent who understood me. She definitely read it, and she's like, no, this is it. I want you to keep this because it's authenticity. And so that was how I was able to, get my novel sold to Norton Liveright. And I was actually beyond grateful for that too, because even that concept of oh my gosh, selling the novel, we never talked about this in MFA programs. We were told to write, just write. We're just happy writing, but the business part is when the real deal happens, where in advance, what is that, and then you're gonna get publicists, oh really, who are they, what's, so working, knowing now that you're in this realm of author, and really the business part is really, I think, where a lot of us need help with when the time comes, because we get our agents, but then they walk us through the process for sure, but really the motion of knowing that you're going to come out into this world, and these are the other team that you have that's going to help you, knowing how to navigate that well, to be. And then I have a lot of great friends, mentors in Brooklyn, both Caribbean authors and authors in general, who now they're guiding me through this process, oh yeah, this is what to expect in this pregnant stage as you wait. So, yeah, very helpful.
Okay, if I may, just quickly piggyback on that question and asking the two authors, Tiffany, okay, and Fiona, what role does authenticity play, okay, in your narrative? And because I was even thinking in terms of Tiffany, where in your novel, okay, where Iona, at some point, after telling the story, okay, of her parents and how they came together, the quote that she said, "This ain't true history." And it seems to me as though quite often you pit perhaps truth and fiction or fact and truth, against each other. But what role does authenticity play in your work, and also the use of language?
So Professor Alexander is talking about my novel, Land of Love and Drowning. The authenticity is really important. I think I should start by saying that there's no such thing actually, and that we're all just trying to write our truth. But at the same time, this is made more complicated for someone like me writing from the Virgin Islands. I'm not writing from one of the big islands. I'm writing from a small, tiny island. And even, are you really Caribbean, is the question that I often get. And I've been so quiet about what I'm gonna say for so long. My first book came out in 2010, but I have to just say, I have never been invited to Calabash, for example. And I went out, keep a prize and thing, and they still didn't invite me. And I don't know if I think I'm a nice person, so I think I'm a good writer. I think it might have something to do with not being sure if I'm Caribbean enough. And if I belong enough, right? So for me, the question of writing a true Caribbean novel starts with thinking about writing a true Virgin Islands novel. So in this novel, I write my characters from very different ethnic and even class perspectives. I have characters who speak in the vernacular, characters who speak in consciously standard English. I have characters who speak Spanish because we're so close to Puerto Rico. I have characters who are doing lots of different things. And for me, it was important to present the Virgin Islands as this place that is multilingual in our vernacular reality, and to resist the Jamaicanization that my copy editor was attempting, and to realize that would make me, I'm already an outsider publishing in the United States, to go to the question that the young woman asked in the back. But then I'm also find myself Although I don't personally feel like an outsider to the Caribbean, I do know that other people sometimes mark me that way. And I had to be like, well, F all you. And be okay with writing what felt to be honest and true to me. But that being said, was it harder for me to publish? Absolutely. I mean, to return to your question, when I was first trying to get my novel published, we got letters back from editors that said things like, we already have ex-Caribbean writer on our panel. We already have ex-Black woman writer. And the idea that we couldn't have more than one when you have a heap of white Jewish men, I say it, right? but you could only have one Caribbean person or one Black woman. And sometimes I would have the editor very, very supportive of me and say, we love your book, you're gonna be the next Toni Morrison. And then I hear weeks later, the marketing people don't know what to do with you, so I can't offer you a contract. Because the marketing people were very concerned, how are we gonna market you? Where do you go in the bookstore? You know, which ghetto do we put you in? The Caribbean one or the Black one or the woman, you know? So, hello. All of them, I agree. But, you know, so by the time I ended up at Riverhead, which I have to say, publishing-wise, I think happened in part because my stories came out first. Even though my novel and the stories were actually written at the same time, and I assumed the novel would get taken first, the stories came out first with Grey Wolf Press, a small press, independent press, so they can take a risk on a writer who they're not sure is going to sell well because sales are not their major concern. Like prestige is their concern, right? Grey Wolf, they're great press for everybody. And I think because the stories in that collection ended up winning lots of prizes, the book ended up getting a lot of attention, that allowed for the novel to then get attention. And Riverhead is a really good place for writers of color, for writers who are international. They published Junot Diaz, they published Marlon James. So I wasn't that special. And actually, I like being not that special. I like being one of the team. I don't want to be a token. So going to Riverhead has been very good for me with the fiction. And then with the poems, I really wanted to go to People Tree because it's a Caribbean press. And it was very important to me that I have a presence in the region in a way that Riverhead, being an American publisher, couldn't necessarily do. And People Tree, without my doing anything, because like I said, I've been pregnant and tired and everything, has really made sure that the poems have gotten attention in the region. You know, the Bocas Prize is one example.
Tiffany, don't feel bad about Calabash. It's not about belonging. I was born half a mile away from where Calabash takes place, and I've never been invited, so don't worry.
We need to stuff ourselves in a whole suitcase.
No, but my experience of publishing. So the first time I was very lucky. I felt very much like Tiffany that my responsibility was to my characters, that they needed to speak the way they really spoke. And, you know, the novel is multi-generational, but the first generation are from country in Jamaica, so they needed to sound like they came from country in Jamaica, and I just wrote patois. But I was lucky. I was living in Jamaica, I went to a reading, I met a woman who was visiting. It turned out she worked in an agent's office. Through her, I got an agent, and through that agent, I got a publisher, a small independent black press, Harlem River Press. It no longer exists. You know what? Small presses have been really affected by the corporatization of the publishing industry. So my first novel was published as it was, and I was very happy about it. I published the novel before joining an MFA program. And one of my instructors in the MFA program read it and said, you know, I just don't get this lingo. She didn't understand the patois. I can't mention her name. She was from the Caribbean. So there was resistance even from Caribbean people, you know, to writing that invokes the language of your characters, right? That is, it's true to your characters. The second time round with this story collection, the problem was them being short stories, I think, or so I was told. I would send them out and I'd be told, they're really great, but we just can't sell stories. And I sent them to People Tree Press because they are a press that embrace Caribbean literature. And there was an immediate, after a little while, there was a quick acceptance. And, I respect their list. I'm happy to be on the same list as people like Tiffany, right? And I'm grateful for the work they do, but I think it's a problem. The one Black woman writer, the one Caribbean writer, is a fixture that we have to contend with. It's a struggle to get our work published. Yeah.
I think kind of playing off of what you were just talking about, I obviously kind of just watch this from the outside, and I observe and have my own opinions, not being in your field. But I'm always, it's always interesting to me, for example, if a white American writer is writing something, and they're a writer, right? They're labeled as a writer. And I always wonder what it means when, of course in this case this is wonderful, like where it's women writers in the Caribbean, right? But when you're considered the Caribbean writer, or you always have that label, and so it always seems to me that in one sense there's this pride because you're visible, but I imagine that there must be some conflicting feelings at times as far as kind of what you're wearing, and kind of now once you have that label where you're maybe told don't share these stories, or you're either getting fired, or maybe people are saying, this isn't cool, but maybe your publishers are really might be playing up that remarkability. And I was just wondering if you guys could talk about kind of those conflicts, and if you see them as conflicts.
I've not experienced that kind of conflict. Probably because of who my publishers have been. They've accepted my work as it is, right? But I get your point totally. It's a question that circulates. Do you want to be a writer, or do you want to be a Caribbean writer? I'm happy to be either. I am both. I'm a writer, I'm a Caribbean writer, I'm a woman writer. That places me in multiple categories. It only becomes a problem where I'm limited to that category, right? And limited because there's a quota for that category. So, you can only have one Caribbean writer on your list. That's a limiting factor, yeah. But in terms of writerly identity, I'm comfortable with the different identity. I'm also a Black British writer, right? So I'm comfortable with those identities.
Yeah, I see myself as a Caribbean woman writer, and I don't have no qualms about that at all. I think the problem is with the readership, the idea that Caribbean woman, feminist, whatever, somehow means it's not for you, I think is the issue. Because it's really okay for Colin McCann, who is a brilliant writer, to be the Irish writer, and nobody thinks that means it's limiting that his novels are not for them. I mean, his novels are for everyone. They're really brilliant novels. I think they're brilliant novels, but nobody thinks that Irish limits. But somehow we think that Caribbean or woman limits, and that's just racism and sexism. So for me, I seek to resist the idea that these categories are limiting, and so I actually make a point of saying, yes, when I'm asked this question, are you a Caribbean writer or are you a writer? I'm a Caribbean writer, because it's important to me to say my book is for everybody, but my angle of vision is the Caribbean region. It's still a book for everybody, and it's for everybody because I write well. That's it. Mm-hmm. It's not because it's the Caribbean or it's Ireland. So I feel like the problem is with how we understand, like, readership, what is for us and what is not. And I would say, you know, all of us have to do a better job with what we buy in bookstores. I mean, there's this kind of idea that that publishers are keeping it from us. And that's to some extent true. Publishers also have their own histories of racism and sexism. But publishers have an idea. They just want to make a sale. So they have an idea about what you're going to buy and what you're going to read. And a lot of us read a lot of our Caribbean literature or Black literature, you know, in our classrooms, in undergrad or grad school. And we treasure those books, but most of those books were bought on Amazon or secondhand, which means they do not affect sales. Just so we think about that, right? And if we want to affect sales, we have to buy the book new in the bookstore. And most of the books that are bought new in the bookstore, and beyond their numbers in our society, are by white writers. So I think there's something, you know, we think about where we put our money. You know, books are for sale. There's a wonderful bookstore selling the books tonight. So I think some of it is on us as readers, even those of us who read the literature, to make sure that we're putting our money in it so that publishers can see that there is a readership for all of this.
Doctor. You know, so I'm just trying to say, am I doing the right thing? I'm saying, you know, let them find their own way, or should they write it on the side, you know? I'm working people on the movie. They pay the bills, you know, on a writer. And they're artists too. I don't know why okay, I shouldn't say that, but they really are great writers, and I love them for that. They excel in their English literature class and history class. Even our biology teacher said when she writes, it's excellent. So what should I do? Should I tell her to keep it, you know, keep it on the side, or should I let it pursue things that
I have thoughts about this, yeah.
We all have thoughts about this.
We have thoughts. I'm a parent as well, yeah. I just want to say first that you're a good mom. It sounds like you clearly want the best for your children and you want their future to be bright and strong. And that is really the most important thing. And it is true that an artist, especially artists of color, struggle financially, have a hard time. That is the truth. And if any of us were like, just tell them go be an artist, that might be nice. But unless you are independently wealthy and can make that happen for them, it's not a fair thing to even put on your shoulders or on theirs. My situation, coming from a poor background, I would say, and this is not necessarily the right answer, and I think the two women, and maybe even Simone, could answer this in a different way. I would say actually that having a day job is a good idea for an artist. And I mean, we all have day jobs. All of us on this panel, none of us are surviving off of our writing. And that having a day job is really important. And not only because it pays your rent and all that kind of stuff, but also it frees you up to write what you actually feel is good, or to paint what you actually feel is good, or make the music that is actually good, because you don't need to please the masses in the way that, say, like Danielle Steele has to write the thing that's going to sell a lot of books because she relies on that to feed herself, right? And if you don't need the art to feed you, then you can actually make more beautiful art. So I suggest in all cases, having a day job is a good idea because it is tough. And many of us are very talented and still don't make it because the world isn't always recognizing the talent. So I think it's important to continue to work as an artist, but also to continue to have a real work that could pay the bills.
Yeah, I didn't read.
I was going to add too, like even teaching writing, because so my day job, I teach writing, college level writing, and I think I've definitely enjoyed this process because as a writer, I enjoy teaching. I feel like my writing has improved as a result of teaching. So it doesn't even feel like I'm working, like I'm going to work 9 to 5. It just feels like, oh, I'm writing really by helping other younger writers develop their craft, right? And so something that he or she loves, perhaps, that is probably close to what they aspire to be.
Yes, I would say a day job, yes, but a day job that leaves you headspace to do your writing.
Yeah. Yes.
Right, because not all day jobs do that. Right. Yeah.
Engineering might not allow that.
Right. or medicine.
Yeah.
One last question. Can you talk about your writing process now that you sort of talked about the importance of having some kind of work that will facilitate your writing? Can you each talk about what you do as a writer to make progress as a writer?
The only way I can make progress as a writer is to have quiet and time, right? And that's usually during the breaks because I teach. I am not a writer who can sit down for 5 hours and just keep writing. So I also read while I'm writing. But I try to remain engaged with literature while I'm working on fiction, yes. And that's the only consistent aspect of my process that I can put my finger on. Right.
I have a very busy life. I'm pregnant now, but I already have 2 children. I have a husband. I raised my younger brother, put him through high school and college. I teach full-time at the New School in both the undergrad and the graduate program, and I'm a very dedicated teacher. I give my students blood every semester, and I love them deeply. So I would say I'm very busy. So for me, that means that I have trained myself to actually not need quiet, to not need stretches of time. I will write any damn place. If that means I have a minute on the train, I write it on the subway. If I'm on a plane ride to go to a lecture, I'm writing on the plane. But it also means that I forgive myself when I cannot write. So for the past couple of months with the baby impending, my husband and I trying to buy a house and all kind of foolishness, I haven't really been writing that much. But a lot of writers I know feel bad. Oh, I'm not writing. Oh. And I don't feel bad because I also feel like I'm constantly thinking and experiencing. And as long as I'm doing that in an active, creative way, like if I'm experiencing the world in a creative and curious way, that's still going to be useful to my writing. So I feel like that's all part of it, and I don't feel bad about that. But like Ifiona, I have the only thing that I have, I don't have no special pen or glass of wine, none of that. But the one thing I have is I always read. I'm always reading also when I'm actually typing. And for me, it's always poems. Even if I'm writing fiction or even essays, I go to the poetry. Because for me, the kind of writer that I am, ultimately the most important part of my palette as a writer is the language. So even if I'm writing fiction, I have poems on hand to reference and inspire. So for me, that's the one part of my process that is a consistent part.
I definitely read and write as well. Toni Morrison, I can't go without having any Toni Morrison novels with me while I'm writing. I teach, but I teach part-time, so on the days when I'm not teaching, I'm either grading or writing. And, I make it like I get up pretending that I'm going to work. I get dressed because I don't want to turn Wendy Williams on, my wife, or anything else. I make my coffee, I sit at the computer, and I sit there until my characters come to me. And if I'm not writing on the subway, I'm constantly daydreaming. Like I become my characters. So like, how would my character be seeing this world right now? How would he or she be looking at that individual? And like in terms of dress or style, like walking literally in the character's shoes. So definitely, like when I'm not writing, I feel like I'm constantly thinking, imagining, and that helps me a lot as well.
Okay, and on that note, before I thank these phenomenal women, I would like to let you know that Revolution's Bookstore is here, and they do have books of Tiffany's book as well as Ifiona. So please do stop by and buy a copy, 2, 3, and they're willing to sign your book, so please do. So please join me in saying thank you to this wonderful group of women.